guys, thank you so much again for attending the first Future of Gender Equity in Tech panel. My name is Swati. I am a member of the growth team over at Hugo. We put together this event along with our wonderful partners, and we also wrote the white paper that some of you may have seen floating around. Over the past few years, ongoing efforts in gender equity have been propelled forward by significant events including the Me Too movement. While these have made an incredible impact on culture in general, they haven't changed things to the extent that we expected. The question we're asking now is how we can do more, how more of us can do more. And we've landed on the use of a strategic collaboration tool stack as a near universal everyday approach. The proper use of these tools can help move teams toward a level playing field for everyone at work. You can read more about this approach in the white paper we released this week. We have a few copies available tonight that are floating around, but you can download your own as well at genderequity.team. We're going to have questions for all of our panelists, and then afterwards we will have a few minutes set aside for Q&A. So as they're talking, if you guys want to think of those, we will have a mic running around at the end for you guys.
Thanks, Swati. My name is Darren Chait. I'm one of the co-founders of Hugo. It's obviously really great to be here. For context, just to give you a bit of background why we're here and why we're talking about these issues, Hugo's connected meeting notes software. So that means your meeting notes are connected to the people and tools in your organisation. And building collaboration tools has given us a lens on the value of equity and voice. And with that learning and the importance of equity of voice in growing organisations, we're really excited to be working with partners that share the same views as us. In particular, we put this white paper together with support of Atlassian, Blue Jeans and Freshworks, and this incredible event together with support of Slack, Shopify, the Aussie Founders Network and our labs. So we're obviously really grateful for the partners that share the same, not just belief, but way of doing things as we do. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce the panel. From left to right, we have Aubrey, Alexa, who will be moderating, Elizabeth and Delyn. So please give them a round of applause and I'll hand over to Alexa.
So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. This is a topic that you've undoubtedly heard a lot about or read a lot about in a whole heap of different newspapers and publications around the place. But it's actually really interesting to have a first-hand insight from wonderful women such as the ones we have on the panel today who are actually living and breathing this experience and to hear about how much progress we've managed to achieve in a short space of time and the things that we can do going forward to continue that trajectory. So I guess just to start off and find out a little bit more about all of you, maybe just introduce yourself to the audience and kind of give a bit of context around what sort of identities that you bring with you today to this panel, and a little bit more about why this topic kind of stokes your interest and what personal impact it's had on you. The very concept of being, identifying as a female in tech.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Sure. So I bring a couple of different identities to the table. So I'm a white cisgendered lady. And I have a really interesting background religiously. I come from Mormons. I'm no longer Mormon, but my family is very predominantly religious, so I come with that baggage. I am a Bay Area native, so those are some of the things that I'm coming to the table with. The thing that got me interested in this topic, one of my first jobs in tech was for a company that sold mechanical engineering software. And if you've ever hung out with mechanical engineers, they tend to be a very masculine bunch. And in our first conference, I looked around the room and realized that for the first time in my life, I was in a place where I wasn't waiting in line for the bathroom because literally there was two other women that were in my 50-foot vicinity. And it really got me thinking about what does that mean for me in my career? What does that mean for the other women around me who are also trying to advance in their career? And what does that mean for the opportunities that I'm going to have when I was looking forward to the future? So that really that moment, I think, and many that followed were the impetus for my interest in this topic.
Delyn, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Delyn again. Part of my identity is you can view, so I'm Gen X generation, so bring a little diversity to the panel that way. I also am white, but not merely white, like Gaelic. I turn pink. I only turn pink in the sun, kind of white. And I'm a she, her as well, and I identify that way. So those are things that are externally you can see about me, but some of the things that you may not know about me is that I'm a parent. So I'm a mom of 2 kids, which has its own, I will be bringing up some answers related to that for sure in this panel today, and what it's like to be a working mom in tech, which is its own thing. And in an era of continuous partial attention, I like to, in devices, I like to say I have a human superpower, which is I can single task. Focus, just like focus mode, really get in there. Part of the reason that I got into the issue of gender equity actually was kind of by accident and not with intention. It was coming back from maternity leave. And that's when it really hit me, all of the additional things that females in our society are expected to do in the role of mother, volunteer for the PTA, cleaning, all the household tasks that this white paper goes into quite a bit. So part of that is how with limited, not only do you have a second shift at home with the kids, but you have a third shift of all the volunteering that you're expected to do. So that was kind of how I thought, like, how are women doing this? And really reaching out and networking, and that's how I got really into gender equity as a subject.
How about you, Aubrey?
Hey, I'm Aubrey. I'm the head of diversity and belonging here. I work upstairs. So the identities that I carry in, I'm queer, I'm Latina. Yes, Mexicans come in this color. People say me all the time, like, that's your stereotypes talking. What else? I am not over 40, so I like just talking about ageism in tech. I like to be an ally for that. And what actually got me interested in gender equity was that I ended up dropping out of Stanford because of the shocking amount of institutional sexism that I experienced. And then I got into tech. That was great. So I worked at a tech company where I actually really liked a lot of my teammates, and I was like, why are you all so white? And they were like, we're a meritocracy, we don't want to lower the bar. And I was like, you don't even know how racist you're being right now, do you? And they were like, what? I was like, I can fix this, I do social science. And so I got into it literally by running experiments on the recruiting team at that company because no one knew better enough to say no. And then I accidentally face planted into a whole career based on it. So I'm still a little confused, but I love it. So yeah, I think that's my story. Is I didn't want anyone to experience what I did.
So, I mean, you've all kind of alluded to it a little bit, but, you've had some kind of, experience that's led you to kind of, confront this issue head on. How do you think, like, taking a look back here, everyone's at a different stage in their career, how do you think that gender has really affected your trajectory in tech?
That's a good question. I think that one interesting thing has been that I've been in marketing for a lot of my career, and so I've always had women as bosses. I've never had a man as a boss in a tech company, which tends to be kind of unusual, right? In marketing, it actually isn't. We are a very lady-dominated field. A lot of times there are more women in the room than there are men. And so I think that there was a unique thing that happened where there was sometimes a competitiveness in some roles that I was in. There was sometimes moments where it felt like my boss was maybe rooting for me, but also a little bit rooting against me because that, didn't want to necessarily give up her seat at the table. It was a lot harder to see that we should all kind of have seats as opposed to there was just the one for the one lady in the room. And so I think that was kind of shocking to me in some ways that here, that would be an issue from, like, you wouldn't want me to succeed because I might displace you instead of we can all sit down together and be stronger because of that. On the other hand, there were times where I had bosses who were women who would advocate for me, but they were advocating to men, and so they had to fight so much harder for me to get the same things that my male colleagues got. And so that was like, so it's been interesting on both hands, where I think that sometimes those biases that we hold don't necessarily always come from what you might consider the opposite gender, that sometimes, you know, we can be our own worst enemies for our gender as well.
I've definitely experienced that in my own career as well, having worked under many female bosses who kind of what we would describe as pull the ladder up from behind them, which is a real shame. What about you, Delyn?
I feel like I've been kind of lucky. I had a slightly different experience, I guess. I have had a lot of male bosses I would consider to have, I've been very lucky and very blessed to, I would consider them in the camp of male allies, and I know we have a lot here in the audience today. So I felt like they understood the industry that I was working in probably better actually than I did. I wouldn't say they were looking out for me or spoon-feeding me anything, but when they saw talent, I do feel like they went above and beyond to amplify, I would say, what I was doing. And that is not always the experience. So in terms, I feel like I've been kind of lucky and maybe slightly atypical in my experience.
Aubrey, what you know, how do you think your genders have affected your kind of trajectory?
So I have an interesting experience. Really quickly, there's actually, it's called, I think, I don't remember what it's called, but when the culture actually tells you that they have one and done diversity, that's where you get that competition. So that's not actually a function of like individuals, it's a function of the perceived culture, sociology studies for you there. So I mean, the really like obvious way is that I like do social justice with capitalism, right? So like the trend of gender equity gave me a job and a career. But I think one of the stories that I find funny is every job offer that I've ever gotten was from a woman who fought her male boss to give it to me. Literally, my skip level has never wanted to hire me when I came in. And so I've actually really benefited from women going to bat for me. The most common feedback is, oh, but she's too young. She can't possibly be able to do the job because she doesn't have X number of years of experience. And so I've been incredibly lucky that women have gone to bat for me, who looks like a 12-year-old without makeup. And so that's, I guess, been lucky for me. And then I think I sort of carved out my own way to make intersectional gender equity my job.
So kind of building on that, you know, what do you think is like the general attitude towards, you know, building a culture of equality in tech at the moment? And do you think that this sort of you know, attitude goes far enough to kind of creating a change that is going to be sustainable?
Do you want to go first?
Sure, change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like the Bay Area in particular, like tech obviously is outside of Silicon Valley, but then we have this little 90-mile bubble around the Bay Area of tech, and I feel like we have become even more blind to our own privilege than we may have been in the past. And that's what I'm seeing with tech today. You can go out the front door of this office and see people who do not have a lot of privilege. And I feel responsible. I feel like tech has a role to play and a role to say. So saying that it's a meritocracy and the best ideas by the top, and if you're smart enough, good enough, it's just how it's been, is a story that tech tells itself, I think, and continues to tell itself. And in 2019, if you walk around the streets of San Francisco, I would challenge anybody who's a human and has a working heart to not feel and continue to be blind by that privilege. And so I think tech needs to take a good, honest look at itself and see how we're going to change it.
I would agree with that. I also think that there's a lot of really good intentions. But there's also a lot of people who just want to check a box, which is unfortunate. But I think that there are companies in tech that are out there that are trying to walk the walk. It's an imperfect walk, and sometimes they stumble. But I think that there's definitely effort going on. I think that sometimes it feels incremental, and it feels like perhaps we're not really making as much progress as our intentions are to make, but that when you look backwards and you think about, like when I think about when I first started in tech 12 years ago now, and the conversation was, one or two or three people. It wasn't a wider, events like this did not happen. So when you think about looking backwards and how far that has come, it's still incremental. We're still not where we need to be, but people do have good intentions. There are companies that follow through, and there are companies that don't or that fall short. But really, that's the makeup of the people. I think one of the really cool things that I love about working at Slack is that we have we have channels where we can go in and say, hey, we kind of don't agree as employees with the decision that has been made about something, that whether it's gender equity or it's something else, and feel like we're heard. And I think that is progress. And I think that that's something to acknowledge and be proud of, but there's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of that bubble, I think, still sometimes surrounds us.
So I'll say two things, which are, I tend to be an optimist, but probably for surprising reasons. So I think that the first trend that makes me a little bit optimistic and a little bit concerned is that most companies in this space have actually just done diversity branding. Have not done much to actually structurally change their companies. And if you want to go look at the LinkedIns of about half of the chief diversity officers in the industry, and you'll notice they spent their entire career in marketing. And I think that's really important because this work requires specialized expertise. But why I'm optimistic about that is because for the first couple of years of the new wave of this movement, it was actually really hard to differentiate which companies actually cared in recruiting change and which ones just had really good marketers. And I think what you're starting to see now is a separation there of companies who just keep, saying, we have allies internally, and the ones whose numbers actually go up. And so that's really compelling to me because it means that underrepresented people are going to make better choices about where they're going to be able to thrive. And frankly, I think those companies are economically going to kick the asses of the ones who don't, right? So we all win. The second thing that I'm excited about is that we talk about gender equity. But one thing I would really like to bring into the conversation is especially the way that race is ignored. So what we see from a numbers perspective is that over the last 5 years, white women have made pretty good gains in tech, but almost all of those have come at the expense of black women. And I think that is absolutely unacceptable. And so I think we need to really talk at Atlassian, how we try to get around this is we talk about stress cases, not edge cases. So we use personas when we design people programs. And I promise you, if you design a program that causes a queer black woman to thrive in your environment, the straight white cisgender women are going to be just fine. And so I think that we need to flip the model, and we need to be more intentional. I think of myself as a white passing woman, so I bring in race a lot. I'm optimistic because I think the people who are doing it right, it's starting to, the impact of that work is starting to be seen. And so I think that those companies are going to win, and those people who have been marginalized or lacked the opportunity that they deserved are going to be able to pick the better opportunities for them.
I think you just hit on a really good point there, which is that, to talk about, like achieving greater levels of equality for women is like a very, almost in and of itself, a bit of a too broad a bucket. Like we need to take a deeper look at, women who identify as different religions, who identify as different races, and sort of see whether those gains have been equally distributed. And I think, Aubrey, you raised a really good point that, these gains, in your experience and in the numbers, indeed, aren't equally distributed. Have either of you noticed that, or have your companies had any kind of unique approaches to trying to make sure that equality and the gains of equality are being spread across people who identify as being women across a whole range of different personal variables?
Yeah, I think before I worked at Slack, I was at a company called Blanche, and we actually, when we started, like, hey, we need to actually have people in the room talking about how to fix this problem that all of our engineers are like white dudes from Stanford. And so we went around and talked to a bunch of different companies, and Slack was one of the companies that we went to and talked to. And I remember sitting down with their team and listening to all of the programs that they had put into place and all the questions that they were asking. And I was like, this is a company I want to work for, because they actually, like, they're not just saying, here's some best practices, but they're saying, this is exactly what we do. Here's the results. We're going to make them public in a diversity report. We're going to publish a blog about it. We're going to call ourselves out when our numbers go down, and we're going to be like, this is a good progress when the numbers go up, but it's still not where we want to be. And I think that's something that I'm really grateful for. There's all kinds of, I mean, Slack was one of the first places that I heard about ERGs. Like, I didn't know that was a thing that you could have at work. Like, what? Slack was one of the first places where I even heard the term underrepresented minorities as opposed to, or underrepresented population, as opposed to people just using diversity as a catch-all for not white. And I was like, that is so much of a better way to phrase it. Or even having people talk about, the type and the thought of gender as a spectrum. Having a company that's like, gender is a spectrum. Like, they just came out and said that. Like, we're not going to sit here and say that it's just a man or just a woman. You have to identify with each, or one or the other. I think that those are things that are really tangible ways that make you kind of feel good about the things that you're doing at work, and make you feel like the company that you work for is invested and on the right track. And so that's one thing that I think that I take away from that.
Well, I work for Shopify, who is headquartered in Canada, and my particular office is located in Toronto. So when I go back there, Toronto, for those of you who don't know, is the most diversity per capita in the world, and that is in large part due to their immigration policy. So we can, this is not the topic of today, but you can counter the belonging and inclusion and diversity of a lot of companies in Canada purely because they have a workforce that in and of itself is more diverse and there's more access to opportunities. So that equity part of the gender equity here is I feel in much more in practice in tech. I've noticed in my travels to Toronto. And the other thing I wanted to bring up, so we have a Slack channel called Belonging. That is our diversity inclusion channel. And one of the threads that was actually brought up was Aubrey's thread in my Belonging channel. I know.
This is very meta.
Slack. So, and what was getting a lot of up-leveling in the Belonging channel was your recent study on the term diversity, right? And I'll kind of hand off maybe so that you can explain these are your own words, but it really resonated. Like the whole Belonging channel totally blew up. And I'll let Aubrey tell the findings, but
That was like the best transition ever. Also, I need your help. I'm going to tell you that before I tell you this story. I need to change my job title. So every year Atlassian does something called the State of Diversity Report. And that came because a couple of years ago, I was looking for benchmark data on attitudes and behaviors towards D&I in tech. There was none. And I wrangled some money from another team and we ran a survey so I could get my data. And when we got it back, the results were so surprising, we decided to release it to everyone because we're like, if we're benefiting, why not share it? And last year, what we found, because I include different questions every year in addition to the regular ones, and I decided to add a trick question because I have this thing where I hate it when people call underrepresented or marginalized people diverse, like white people aren't a part of diversity. They are, you just broke the system. And so what we found was that diversity or diverse was associated with basically only two groups. And that's white women and black Americans, which is weird because in Australia, Australians were more likely to say that African Americans were diverse than Indigenous Australians. Do you know how many African Americans live in Australia? Not that many. And so what I realized was that the entire field had a brand positioning problem. Because while I think we can all agree that those groups have faced significant marginalization, lack of access that they deserve, it actually was creating an us versus them mentality. So anyone who didn't fit into one of those two groups was like, diversity is not about me, bye. And so what we actually flipped to is talking about building balanced teams. You want to know why that works on first? Who's going to die on the hill of building an imbalanced team? Right? Like, you've already won the linguistic argument. But I think what it helps to do, or at least what I've seen in Atlassian, is it suddenly broadens the conversation. So folks who are intersectional can come in. But what about that straight white cisgender guy who grew up in a trailer park? Right? The fact that he gets yelled at says, you're privileged. Well, he's probably faced a lot of the same barriers that folks of color have faced, or people from other marginalized backgrounds. And so by actually letting them into the conversation, it turns out that they're more likely to go take an ally action for those exact groups that we just talked about, right? It becomes about all of us bringing in something unique. And what I've found is that creates more engagement and more acceptance for the programs that you still have to make sure that those barriers for underrepresented people don't exist. So I got this critique, someone called me a white supremacist on Twitter when I released this. And it was really interesting because because they were like, you're ignoring the historical marginalization of like Black and African American people in America. And I was like, did you read the diversity report that said hashtag Black Lives Matter? Because that didn't feel subtle to me. But what it's actually helped us do is have more direct conversations about race. Because suddenly we can say, in what way is your team imbalanced? What way might that have happened? And we get away from accusations and we get towards, what are the reasons for this? How can we disrupt those reasons? And so I offer that to all of you. The favor I want you to do is that my title is Diversity and Belonging, and my boss says I can't change it to Balance and Belonging until everyone adopts this language, so please help me make it happen like Fetch. Yeah, right? You can do that? So that's it. Diverse is only when you're talking about everybody.
All right, I'm gonna have a little dictionary that we all take away after this, and
Balance and belonging.
Aubrey changing jobs title. It's an interesting crowdsourced request. So I guess the other thing that's kind of just, surfaced from this discussion we've had is that, obviously there's a massive intersectional component to diversity. There's also, a pretty clear trend amongst the companies that we all work for. I work for Wing, which is Alphabet's drone delivery company. We have pilots in Finland, Australia. I work with colleagues in Virginia. I work with colleagues all around the world. We've got Shopify from Canada. Atlassian has a very large presence in Australia. What have you guys noticed in terms of, the role of gender, in terms of the differences that play out in in-person communications and digital communications? Because as I said, we all work in very geographically distributed teams. How have you seen the notion of gender play out throughout that?
I can give a couple of lessons. So I think that one of the kind of really lovely things about being distributed is you have records of a lot of things, so you can spot inequitable patterns a lot easier than if you're just speaking, right? But I'll tell a little bit of a story about Atlassian, which is, who knows about Hey Guys? Just don't say that, right? Because we're not all guys. But so we had an engineer at Atlassian who this really, really rubbed her the wrong way. She hated it. And so she built something called NudgeBot inside Stride. And so anytime you'd say, hey guys, it would just be like, did you mean pals or team? And it had to be installed in the room. But I think that was something that was really interesting was people noticed that this was happening and they probably wouldn't have cued into it without the chat product. And it was actually created a lot of change because changing how you speak is really hard. But as a first step, just pulling it out of sort of chat, that actually had a really big effect. And we had women saying, this actually feels better for me in this environment. And it seems so tiny, but you think about that impact when it compounds over time. So I think that's a really cool way that tooling sort of helps you build a more inclusive and equitable environment.
One thing that I think has been interesting is the different ways that you can be perceived on a video call. So I think that I've I've noticed that, especially with folks that were reporting to me directly that were in different time zones, but were women, but were on a call that were predominantly men, sometimes there was a propensity to sort of like not really let that person cut into the conversation. Even if there were other men on the call, they felt much more comfortable cutting into the conversation, whereas a lot of the women on the call would kind of wait for someone to finish their thought and then jump in. And one of the things that a woman that I worked with, she was like, you know what, I'm just going to start jumping in. And she did it, and then other women on the call started to do it. And we had this kind of weekly team meeting where now it was almost like someone needed to set the example in order for the rest of us to feel like it was okay to do. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is that because of that, like we kind of noticed that. And so we decided to start having this team meeting where everyone had to be remote. So it didn't matter if you were calling in on your commute or you were calling in from the conference room down the hall, or if you were sitting next to each other on a conference call, then there was some like muting and issues there, the womp 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 of noises. But by forcing everyone to have the same sort of access to the conversation, it really made people notice when they were doing something crappy, like never letting someone else on the call speak. By having to build that experience, they felt some sense of empathy, and they were like, oh, I see why you never get a word in. I see why you're always following up with like these expansive posts about like what you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to. And that was like a really cool just experiment that we tried that turned out to work really well. Yeah.
I'll just do a fast follow on that. A couple of the remote distributed team practices that I learned from friends at Trello have really helped with gender equity. So one of them was the have your daily stand-up. If a couple members of your team are not in it, like everyone get on the call individually from their laptop rather than dialing in from a conference room. And there's something very equalizing about the voice of everybody. So it becomes much more equitable and people feel a lot more empowered to join the conversation and say something. Versus, I don't know how many of you have ever been the person like dialed into a conference room and there's 10 people and they're having their own conversation and it's like you're not even part of the meeting. So that was the tip is to have everyone dial in as if everyone were remote to feel that empathy. And the other one, which just makes a lot of sense for geographic diversity and time, is just to make sure that you have 4 hours at least that overlap with your existing team. That way you have the flexibility of hiring in Brazil or Ukraine or Canada or Australia, as long as you have those 4 hours as an anchor of time. That really also helps people have synchronous time, which is also important for team building. Slack, the email is great, but Slack has helped us both cut down on meetings and help us be more effective with our synchronous time together.
We also have a practice where after each meeting, because there are plenty of people who are in a different time zone and are hopefully sound asleep, and or there are a couple of our members of our team are working mothers and they come in the office really early in the morning and they'll leave early. And we have a system where we rotate who takes notes, and if the person doesn't send the notes out to everybody, they buy us a beer. So basically sharing the office housework out and making sure everyone has access to the information they need is really important. So tools like Hugo and Slack and things like that really sort of are just an institutional way to try and make sure everyone has access to information and isn't cut out by nature of their role or their chosen role in the world or their type of diversity, I guess, for want of a better word. So I guess the other question I have for you all is around what do you see, like obviously we've gone through what is the Me Too movement. We've gone through this discourse kind of becoming more and more like a popular discourse around equality. So I guess my biggest question for you is what do you see as the main blocker that is still stymieing women who are in the tech industry from kind of progressing and achieving the opportunities that they may want to achieve?
And I don't mean like all men are terrible. I genuinely don't mean that. But the fact is, I want to see more men stepping down so that women can step up. Ellen Powell said like Beto O'Rourke is like, the male board member who says they want more women on the board but won't give up their seat. And so there's plenty of research that says that, women and men do the same thing, they're judged differently. And so I would just offer to folks who don't identify as women or don't identify as minorities, or frankly if you identify as white or able-bodied, think about the ways that you can move aside and create space for someone who may lack access that you often have access to. Because if each of us stepped aside 2% of the time, that would completely change the world. And we really can share our privileges. So I would invite all of you to think about the ways in which you've had access, privilege, or advantage, and try to say 2% of the time, I'm giving that up for the person who didn't.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, the stepping aside bit. A friend of mine is he speaks at lots and lots of marketing conferences, and he gets asked to speak all the time. And last year, we were having a conversation, and he was like, you know what, I think this year I'm just gonna say no. I'm gonna be like, let me find you someone else who doesn't look like me, like a white guy from Florida, and I know all these people, why don't I just introduce you? And that was one thing, when I was at Blanche, I ran community, that's kind of what I do in my day-to-day life is run community programs for brands, and at Blanche, one of the things that, when we started out, we put together panels, much like this, where we talk about growth in mobile apps, and one of the things that was a mandate for me that I was like, I'm not going to do this is unless we make sure that we have panels that look like the audience that we want to show up. And so if you want to tell me that the only people that you want are white guys in hoodies with logos on them, well, you can die on that hill, but I'm not going to die on that hill. I'm going to die on the other hill where it's not that, because I want people, and it became this mission where sometimes people will be like, just go with the easy one. That this person has spoken on this topic before. And I'd be like, yeah, but if I do a deeper LinkedIn search, I'm pretty sure that I can find 5 women that also know this topic. It's just that you're picking the one that comes to the top first. And there were times where when it was great to hear from men or other folks when I would reach out and ask people to be on a panel, and they'd be like, well, tell me about the makeup of the rest of the panel, because I'm not going to say yes until I know that it's not 4 guys sitting up on a stage proselytizing about things. So I think that stepping aside and men is really a lot of ways where it is.
Yeah, making room at the table. You can lean in, as much as you want, but if there's not room at the table, it doesn't matter. I also in the belonging room asked, I was going to be on this panel, so I asked for feedback from throughout Shopify, what viewpoint I should raise. And our VP of Engineering, a complete badass named Delyn, who is also a new mom, said something that I thought was very powerful. She's like, enough with the thoughts and prayers, and platitudes of inclusion and balance. Show me a company with free, on-site, high-quality daycare, childcare for my kid, and I will believe your words that you are you're walking your talk in terms of wanting more senior engineering women, and just more senior women in general, because that is a big reason why, between the pay gap and everything they talk about, it's...
So we're running out of time here. So in terms of your sort of final parting words to people in the audience, who are either, identify as a person of diversity, who is struggling to kind of get a seat at the table, or someone who in the audience, because you wouldn't have shown up today hopefully if you didn't believe this, but who is, wondering how they can, step aside in the room and assist those who identify as being diverse to kind of get that seat at the table. What's some advice that you would give these people?
I think my biggest tip for folks who are underrepresented is don't count yourself out before the world does. So what I see a lot is people are like, oh, why don't you do that? I might get rejected. I'm like, well, you don't have the job now. So nothing's going to change. And I think that we've been taught to make ourselves smaller, and I'm 5 feet tall, so I'm an expert on that. And I have just decided that I refuse. because straight white men are taught to make themselves smaller in the world, and I think I have the right to show up the same way, and I know that you do. For folks who are well represented, whatever that means to you, I would genuinely share your privilege. Find one way in which you have a hella advantage, and look every week for one way to share it with someone. That's it. You will change the world, I promise.
I mean, +1, heavy +1, lots of snaps. I think that that's exactly the same advice. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but there are so many ways that you can help other people and that other people can help you if you open yourself up to them, and that is a big part of it. If you write yourself off before you even give yourself a chance. I mean, there were so many times. I have an associate of the arts degree from Laney College. What's up, Peralta? All my Peralta people. Yeah, all 2 of us. So I didn't go to 4-year school, right? And for the longest time, being a woman and not going to 4-year school, I was very concerned with, should I even apply for this job? Even these entry-level jobs, they want a BA, and I don't have that. I spent 7 years putting myself through community college. So the second that I stopped counting myself out was the second that, and opened myself up to letting someone else help me and also helping myself, was that moment where things started happening. And so I think that that's also an important thing, is you have to take that leap a little bit, and then once you've taken that leap and you've gotten over that chasm, make room for someone else to jump.
Yes, +1 lots of things here. A very wise person who encouraged me to read Brené Brown. I know I was the only person who had read Brené Brown yet, but who recommended, and she talks a lot about the power of vulnerability, which seems very counterintuitive, and especially if you grew up in Silicon Valley in the mid-90s and it was go, and you're encouraged more to maybe act traditionally male in order to get to leadership positions rather than embracing your vulnerability. One way that you can put yourself in that space if you're seeking opportunity is to invite people into your problem space, was the way that she phrased it. So if you are making yourself vulnerable and show that you don't have all the answers, and you are going to take the time to actively listen to someone who can offer you feedback that will, I have a problem space, please come in. And there's a lot of power, I think, in admitting you don't know everything and encouraging people who do have answers that have more diversity perhaps than your own. Embrace that and ask them to come in.
Just want to say thank you. This is only the beginning of the conversation. We've shared around some copies of the white paper. It's 4 very inspiring people. I'm here for a little bit longer tonight. I encourage you to talk about some of the issues and ideas and strategies that we've heard and spoken about, and absolutely keep the conversation going through social media and through the relationships that we can build in this forum. So thanks very much for coming.